But did you have financial problems at that time?
No, I didn't.
The wounds that she had suffered were dramatically different than the wounds that the children had suffered. You have to remember their wounds were deep, penetrating stab wounds to the chest area and to the back, to the torso. Hers, on the other hand, are slashes, cuts to the extremities and to the neck area.
The defense argued that Darlie was right-handed, and in order to slash her own neck and stab her right arm, she would have had to change hands.
I don't believe that Darlie Routier would had the presence of mind to do that.
Up on the witness stand, crime scene investigator James Cron emphatically stated that no intruder ever entered the house.
I think Mr. Cron missed his calling. What he should be is a psychic reader. He was out there 20 minutes on the scene and he's already solved the case. Doesn't have a fingerprint, hadn't talked to anybody, hadn't seen any of the evidence.
Lab tests revealed that another kitchen knife contained fibers from the window screen that had been cut, and that the bloody fingerprints throughout the house belonged only to Darlie, Damon, and Devon, and not anyone else. The defense accused police of contaminating the scene and not preserving the evidence.
Obviously, when you take some bloody clothing that's still wet with blood, you stuff it into a paper sack, you certainly risk the possibility of transferring blood stains from one location of the shirt to another.
FBI profiler Alan Brantley, who examined the crime scene photos and other reports, testified for the state.
The major contradiction starting out was you have an absolute maximum of human devastation and loss of life, these two young children, and you have an absolute minimum of property damage. It's almost like the offender was very careful not to disturb or damage the personal property that he found or encountered in his home.
There are probably many people in this country who would be scared to death of having the FBI come down and start testifying that someone is statistically guilty.
Brantley believed that for this type of crime, there would have been much more chaos inside the home than just an overturned vacuum cleaner and a broken wine glass.
For someone to have hit that wine rack with sufficient force to cause that glass to be dislodged, you should have dislodged other items that were even more fragile and lighter on that wine rack.
And the outside was also too orderly. The gate was shut, and the windowsill and the mulch on the ground were undisturbed.
The mulch outside the yard wasn't disturbed. Well, beneath the window was concrete. There's no mulch to be disturbed.
Lloyd Harrell was the investigator for the defense. He says there's no way that crime scene was staged.
She never said I had a violent confrontation, that the vacuum cleaner was overthrown, that the glass was broken. So why would somebody invent a story, set a stage, and then not use it?
But the crime scene wasn't the only weapon the prosecution used. Darlie's behavior was on trial as well. They questioned whether she really cared about her children at all. Julie Clark, Darlie's good friend, testified in her defense.
She was a very supportive mother of her children. Everything she did, she geared toward her children in her life.
And the prosecution said the 911 call revealed that Darlie had other things on her mind aside from her dying children.
They point to her phone call. They say that that's not something somebody would say if they just lost their kids, that you wouldn't be thinking along those lines.
On the stand, the first officer at the crime scene reported that even after telling Darlie to help Damon, she never went to him. Instead, she stayed on the phone with 911. But Darlie's written statement contradicts that. And there's another contradiction. Notes taken at Baylor Hospital describe Darlie as tearful, frightened, and sobbing uncontrollably. But when the nurses testified at trial, they changed their story, saying Darlie never grieved or cried for her children. The defense says the nurses were coached before their testimony.
They had a brainstorming session with the Baylor nurses out at the Wyo Hilton on the Holiday Inn to discuss the bruising and the pictures and talk about it, discuss it. You make your own mind up.
It certainly eliminates candor.
Outside the courtroom, both sides played to the media, and sometimes it got nasty.
Well, I think it says that there was no intruder, period.
It's a lie, and you know it.
Do I have to interview in front of this trailer trash over here?
Hey, don't even start.
I'm sure.
You were never in that house. You don't know that family. You don't know anything about it. You come down here, it's a political move.
Next, Darlie takes the stand.
Happy birthday to you.
How damaging was that silly string tape?
I think that was the key. I think that was the key to the prosecutor's case. Greg Davis, the prosecutor, he knew that that was his ringer. Should have never even been admitted into court. Had nothing to do with the crime.
The jury did see the silly string tape, but not the police surveillance tape. That's because, amazingly, the defense never asked for it to be admitted into evidence. It was more important to stress that the police, by videotaping surreptitiously, had violated a federal law against wiretapping. When questioned on the stand about the taping, detectives took the fifth. They did not want to incriminate themselves.
The entire ability to attack the state's case through normally the best witnesses, which the investigators were denied the defense.
And then Darlie took the stand, and her testimony was devastating to her defense.
She is not sympathetic, and when she took the stand, she was a terrible witness.
She wasn't sure at trial whether she was awake or asleep when she got stabbed. She wasn't sure whether she was awake or asleep when she was supposedly beaten by this intruder. She couldn't explain how she could sleep through the attack of these two children when one of them is 1 foot away from her. All of that occurred on direct examination by Mr. Mulder.
And Darlie did not come across, did not make as good a witness as I had hoped she would.
The defense was caught off guard when prosecutors presented Darlie with letters she had written to friends from prison. In them, she wrote she knew who murdered her boys. That was quite a different story, since up until that moment, Darlie claimed she never knew the intruder. When confronted with the letters, she dissolved into tears. In cross-examination, the defense explained the letters by saying that Darlie was only repeating what she had heard from others. But it was too late.
The only time we saw genuine tears were when she was caught in some lies, and that's when we saw the true fear. It was fear for herself because she realized what a fix she's in there.
Despite her testimony, Darlie and the defense remained optimistic. After 4 weeks, the jury adjourned and deliberated for just 7 hours. They returned with a guilty verdict.
They've admitted having watched that tape 7, 8, 9 times, and that was just purely inflammatory evidence. It is based on the whole theory of its relevance is that someone can look at a video of somebody 10 days after this horrific event and tell whether they're a killer or not.
She was a so-called light sleeper. In other words, she woke up in the evenings when her baby son moved around in the crib, but she didn't wake up when her 2 boys were being stabbed within feet away from her. No. She would have heard that. There was very little remorse. I mean, she hardly ever cried.
But it was far from over. Next came the punishment phase.
And I backed him. I said, you have made the wrong decision, but you don't have to compound it by giving her death. You know, something has gone really seriously wrong here, and please, just please give us time to find out what really happened.
The jury returned with the death sentence.
I knew that they would give her the death penalty. That's what they were there for. That's what you find out about death penalty cases, is that in order to be on a death penalty jury, you have to believe in the death penalty.
And in Texas, there is no such thing as life without parole.